Bruce Leininger's son, James, started showing signs of trauma very early in his life. As the situation unfolded, it started to seem as though he was potentially recalling memories from a past life. Bruce went on an investigative research mission to prove beyond any doubt that that was not the case. This is their story. So, Bruce, tell me a bit about you, who you were before James, before children, before thoughts of reincarnation ever entered your mind.
Okay, well, first of all, in terms of my brief bio, I was born into a working class family. My father worked at a plant that manufactured plastics for a variety of things. He was a shop steward in the union there. My mother was a homemaker. She later did some nursing, a practical nurse kind of work. Had a very ordinary childhood, a very happy childhood. Had a great relationship with my grandparents, my mother's parents. Went through school, got into college, was fortunate enough to go to Columbia University and get a graduate degree in political science and focused on Russian studies.
Oh, typical.
I stopped following that work and decided what other skills that I have. So my first job was a job in recruiting, which is what I do now. I like helping people get to the place that they want to get to. Had a long career in human resources as a senior executive with responsibilities for up to 25 or 30,000 employees. That work eventually got me here to Louisiana, where I was hired to help a company go public on the stock market. Had children from a previous marriage. They're all grown. They all have great families. I have 4 beautiful children from that marriage. They're all very successful children and very successful families. And I'm kind of quite ordinary, and this story is an extraordinary event in my life. It created a lot of fear because it was something that I didn't agree with. I didn't think could happen. I didn't understand it. I also grew up as a Methodist and went to church virtually every Sunday with my mother. So I was bred in a Christian culture. And it was something that I enjoyed. I still have some friends that I talk to occasionally. I don't live close to them, that I went to church with and went to school with. And so I'm just very fortunate to have experienced what I'm going to call a good life. Yeah. That doesn't mean we don't have our challenges. There's challenges to life. And so now I'm here. And with this story, it's a never-ending story. It's one that continuously attracts my energy because I think often about what I've experienced and how I processed it.
Yeah, I bet. It's a story, but at the same time, it's your life, and it's your son's life and your family's life. It's more than just a story, isn't it? But you were saying about, your upbringing, it must have been going completely against your entire worldview. You were a Christian. What was your thoughts on reincarnation?
I had absolutely no thoughts on reincarnation.
I'm assuming you'd heard of the concept.
I'm not, what I'd heard of it, but I just thought it was a bit of voodoo. Let's just say that,
voodoo and or fantasy.
Why would somebody go to heaven and come back? Mm-hmm. It didn't make any sense to me. And it was not anything that I spent very much time thinking about. It was more one of those things where, stop using those recreational drugs. Okay. Get off of that stuff. I mean, that's how I felt.
You were never confronted with it, I suppose, directly as well. No. You never had. I mean, most people aren't. I guess it's quite a rare thing what you've been through. Did you ever have any different experiences beforehand, before this all started happening? Did you ever anything kind of that could be classed as either paranormal or just not fitting with things as you knew them to be?
Not really. Not really. I mean, I can't think of anything that was this different and this challenging at all. You know,
Yeah.
certainly nothing mystical, nothing what you would call a spiritual kind of challenge or anything like that.
And no
That's
hint of
what this
anything
was.
similar.
Yeah.
Sorry, what did you say?
I said there was nothing remotely like this that ever occurred to me.
Okay. And nothing remotely similar with any of your other children, your children you had before, James. Nothing that ever gave you
No,
pause for thought or an inclining or anything like that.
no, no. The only thing that happened is I had I have twin daughters, and they didn't sleep in the same cycle, and so they would have sometimes have a nightmare, and one would wake up the other one, but it was, you know, it was infrequent. It was, you know, childs get up, a small child gets up crying,
Yeah.
but it was nothing that was. It's just typical of raising a child.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's nothing remotely like this that occurred.
Okay. So I guess this is a good time for you to tell me how it began. Like, what were the first? I mean, I suppose before you tell me the first thing, tell me about the you know, when you first had James and those first few months before you noticed anything, I guess, and then lead into noticing things and
Okay.
the whole journey from there.
Okay. Well, as we were getting ready to move from Dallas, and this was in uh, late 1999, setting up and going to Lafayette, Louisiana. Uh, Moved here, was traveling back and forth every couple of weeks. There was nothing extraordinary about all of that. We'd moved before, except that this was a move where James was going to turn 2 in April of 2000. So he was a toddler and pretty busy. As a matter of fact, I'll pull this out. That's Mardi Gras bees just shortly after we moved here. Okay, so that's how big he was when this stuff started.
Yeah.
It wound up happening, and I thought it was unusual. I didn't dismiss it as anything other than it was kind of unusual. I was traveling back and forth every couple of weeks to Dallas to just see my family, and we had noticed that James was fascinated by aircraft. Whether we were in a car or he was out in the backyard, because we lived on an approach to DFW, anytime he saw an aircraft, he would get excited. He didn't say anything, he just got excited about it. He'd start waving his hands and ooh, 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 and stuff like that. So he started to attract toys, even at that point, that were aircraft. So I thought, well, gee, since he was so fascinated by all this, on my last trip home before we moved, which was in the middle of February of 2000, I took him to a museum in Addison, Texas. It's called the Kavanaugh Flight Museum. And we went there, and I thought, well, we'll go in there, we'll be there 45 minutes. I kind of bribed him to go because there was a McDonald's close by. I said, we'll go get some ice cream. So I figured that was the reason he wanted to go. Well, we got there, and all I got to say, it was like trying to herd a cat. Okay. He was wandering everywhere. He was going under the chains to get to the airplanes. And we got to a hangar where there were World War II aircraft. And it's like his demeanor changed. He just was standing watching, and we left there and we went toward another hangar, and all of a sudden he's going back to the hangar that we just left, and he didn't want to leave it. He would get upset every time. I said, we have to go see the rest of the museum. And I wound up taking a picture. It's in my book. Of he was just standing like that, pointing. And I thought, this is unusual.
Yeah.
I didn't spend much time thinking about it, other than his fascination with this room was beyond anything I expected. So that was kind of it. we moved, we're getting settled in, and shortly after his birthday, and I don't remember the exact date, but it was right around his second birthday, he started to have violent nightmares.
So this was after the visit to the museum.
That's right. This was in, I'm going to say his birthday's in April. So in the April, early May timeframe, he started to have violent nightmares. And I'm talking about nightmares where he blood curdling screams, kicking at his covers, thrashing about. And because he had just turned 2, he still wasn't, he wasn't that articulate about anything. But he started to, when he did start to talk about it, my wife came back into the bedroom one night. He's talking about being in an airplane crashing in the water and he can't get out. And on 1 or 2 instances, I heard him say the same thing. And this went on and on. Then he started to do some things when he was awake that were kind of unusual. My wife had gone to a hobby store here to get some decorations for the house, some dried flowers and stuff like that. And there was a toy bin near the checkout. It's one of those things where the stores know how to sell stuff. They just put stuff that people want right there and they pick it up without thinking. And she picked up this little toy airplane and she said, "Oh, look, James, it's a little airplane. It has a bomb on it." And I don't know why my wife said that, but he said, "That's not a bomb, Mommy. That's a drop tank." And when I got home from work, she asked me, "You know what a drop tank is?" I said, "Well, it was an extra tank on an airplane." I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, he pointed out that this was not a bomb. This was a drop tank." I thought that was a little very strange, very strange. Again, didn't spend much time. I was more concerned about the frequency of the nightmares at that point.
At that point, were you starting to kind of suspect anything different?
Well, we took him to the doctor to find out why he was having nightmares so much. And he says, "Well, he's having night terrors."
Yeah.
Well, not 5 nights a week, almost every night.
Night terrors, because they're worse than nightmares, right? Night terrors. And you say that was almost every night.
Yeah. And then he started to articulate what was happening, that he was in an airplane on fire, it was crashing in the water. The little man couldn't get out. And the way he was describing it, it was like it was something he was watching. It's the best way I can describe it. So I said, "Well, what kind of airplane did you fly?" He said, "A Corsair," which floored me, and this was before, sometime in the May, June, July timeframe.
And he was 2 coming up to 2.5, something like that.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah. I mean, I showed you that picture of what he looked like. That's what he looked like when he was talking about stuff like this.
And just to ask the question, I think I know the answer, but just to make sure, I'm assuming he wasn't well versed with computers and didn't have regular access to internet and wasn't popping down a shop to get the paper and stuff like that by himself. Yeah, I've got to ask the question because there's going to be people listening and watching thinking like, "Oh, I bet he saw it somewhere, he read it somewhere."
Well, back in the year 2000, the internet isn't what it is now.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah,
and
I remember.
And there were some very frustrating moments as I went through this.
I was about 10 at that point, roughly, and I remember using the internet. I'd have to go through getting permission from Dad, and he'd have to help me figure out how to wire it all up, and then you'd hear that tone, that noise for like 5-10 minutes while it connected, and then eventually you get very slow loading basic internet pages, where even you just didn't know where to look for relevant information, really. So a 2-year-old. Yeah.
So then probably the very first thing that I recall him saying that really piqued my interest and I thought was very strange, startling actually, is my ex-sister-in-law came to visit us, and somehow or another, I don't know whether it was a nightmare he had or something that she witnessed, but she said, "My plane got shot in the engine, it crashed on fire, and I couldn't get out." And my sister-in-law said, "Well, who shot your plane?" And he said, the Japanese. And then she said, well, how did you know it was the Japanese? And he said, the big red sun. Now, he said that when he was, let me think, April, May, June, July. He was 2 years and 3 months old.
Mm.
And that floored me. So he was still having the nightmares. And then as he was getting a little older, it seemed like he would get in a dreamy state before going to bed, and he started to talk about what was on his mind. And so there were instances where he would just start talking about being in the airplane. And when my wife asked him, well, who was the little man in the airplane? He said, me, which again, it was just mystifying. It was troubling and mystifying, because it was such a regular event. So then one night, it was in August, it was actually August 26th to be exact. My wife came to me and said, listen, you got to listen to James. He's talking about this. So I went in and he was laying in bed, and I said, well, tell me a little bit about what's going on. Where did your airplane come from? And he said, a boat. Well, he was talked about the Japanese. So I knew enough about the fact that the Japanese were the adversary in World War II in the Pacific, and that there were a lot of Navy ships. I had two uncles that had been in the Navy in World War II, so I knew something about that. I said, well, does your ship have a name? And he said, without hesitating, Natoma. And I said, Natoma? I said, that sounds Japanese. He looked at me like I had a hole in my head. No, it's an American. And I mean, here's a kid that's 2 years and 4 months old, about ready to kick my ass. You idiot, it's American, you know?
Yeah.
And, I said, American, okay. Well, I was totally floored by that. So he went to bed. I went in and I got onto the internet. And after looking for about an hour, I found there were a bunch of things named Natoma. There was a Natoma hotel. There was a geodetic ship that did surveying work of the ocean floor called Natoma Bay. And then I found a hit in the Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships. Okay. USS Natoma Bay, CVE 62. And I read it, and it was about a World War II aircraft carrier, an escort carrier that fought in the Pacific. And I go, oh my God. And I still I'm getting goosebumps now. Mm. The hair is standing up in the back of my neck, just like it did when it first happened. I said, wow, where did this come from? How could this happen? Something so specific and so on point.
Yeah.
Well, except for reading that and having that, which is what I just showed you a copy of what I printed out. And I know when it happened because the date is on this. And I found it about 1 o'clock in the morning that night. Okay.
So just to pause you for 1 second, Bruce. So at that point, all the research you were doing was basically to prove that this was all made up. To prove that it was the fantasy of James, and so that you could put to bed any idea of there being something different going on, let's say. Or am I right in saying that?
Well, I hadn't gotten to that point yet. I was just amazed at how he
just
could
intrigued
something so specific.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And it does feel like a lot of the stuff that, the compelling things, the things that would have really unsettled you and made you, it's the way he would say things as much as what he would say, right? Like you said, this 2.5-year-old wanted to kick your ass because you suggested the ship sounded Japanese. And those are the things that I think are really fascinating as well. It's the stuff that's more than just the words.
Yeah. That's right. His actions, and things like that. So about a month, he was continuing on with the nightmares. although they seemed to be kind of, let's just say, slowing down. They weren't quite as frequent by that point, but he was still having them at least 3 or 4 nights a week. So then in late September, again, we had this occasion where he was kind of talking about this as he was, the best way I can describe it is when you're going to sleep, you get into that dreamy state and you start flying around, whether you're part conscious and part sleeping. And he would start just talking extemporaneously. So when he started talking about this, and so there was a question, well, is there anyone else in your dream? And he said, yes, a man named Jack. I said, Jack? Did Jack have another name? And he said, yes, Larson. I don't know anybody remotely by that name. I don't know anybody personally named Jack. Okay.
So did James, I guess he didn't either know anybody named Jack at that point then?
No. Like again, this was in September of 2000.
Yeah.
April,
so he knows who you know
at
the most.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're an adult and you have children, you just sit down with your 2-year-old and talk about your adult friends. But come on, give me a break. So anyway, I started to do the same thing. I started to, well, how am I going to find out anything about somebody named Jack Larson? And I didn't know where to look or how to look. I found a site where you could go to each state. You could look for people named Jack or military veterans, because at that point I thought he was actually talking about Jack Larson as the person who died.
Right.
Okay, that was my first supposition, that this was the person who died or who was stuck in the plane. So finally, after looking loosely, I didn't do it constantly because I didn't have time, because I was too busy doing what I was doing on my job. Finally, about a week and a half into October, I found a website called the American Battle Monuments Commission. And it was a listing of anybody who was buried or listed as missing that was a U.S. veteran, and it covered a number of different wars: the Korean War, the war in Vietnam, World War II. And I found a listing of Larsons on that thing, spelled 2 ways. One was Larson and Larsen. And like 130 of them.
Right. Yeah.
And this blew me away. So I started to try to, let me see, it was somebody who was in an airplane. So it had to be somebody who was a pilot, had to be somebody that was in the Navy, because it was a Navy. It was off of a ship. There weren't there wasn't anybody else taking aircraft off of ships. And there really wasn't anything I could find other than I had the list, and I was able to, this is a page of that list. Okay. And
Some
it went
Jack
on,
Larsons.
yeah, and it went on for several pages. This is people with the name Julius and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I actually then said, well, I know there's an archive. Maybe I can contact the National Archives and find something. And I did write a letter about it to them, looking for information about somebody who I thought might be dead. And because I picked out one of the names, I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody named Jack Larson. And they came back and said, well, you're not a family member. You can't have that information, because at that point there was a restriction on how you could get information on veterans. And it had to do with fraud for pensions and a whole bunch of other stuff, I guess. But there wasn't anything to do with it other than, again, this was how could he come up with a name that was real?
Yeah.
And there's 130 of them with the last name Larson.
Yeah. What were your thoughts at that point?
Huh?
What were your thoughts at that point? Because obviously you'd had the Natoma, and you'd found the Natoma.
I was scared about it. It started to cause me to tremble. Because here he's talking about such specific things, and where in the world could he find it, or how could it happen? He was watching Teletubbies and stuff like that on TV. It was a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
So then, right around Thanksgiving, my father had been in the Marine Corps right at the end of World War II. So I was always buying him something that was related to the Marine Corps. It was something he was real proud of. So I bought a book called The Battle for Iwo Jima, and I received it just before Thanksgiving. And I wanted to page through it thinking, well, if it's a good book, then maybe I'll buy it for myself. So the day after Thanksgiving, I was paging through the book. My son got up early. We used to have this ritual of watching cartoons on a Saturday morning, and he hopped up on my lap. And so I have this book for Poppy. I'm looking through it, and if you want to sit on my lap, it's got pictures in it. And so I started to page through it, and we got to a page, and this is the cover.
Yeah.
And we got to this page, and he pointed to the picture of the island. And he said, "Daddy, that's when my plane got shot down." And my brain went blank. You could have, my brain turned to liquid.
Yeah.
Poured out of my ears. What?
Yeah, I bet.
I went back. We got watching cartoons. I went back to the Naval Dictionary, the report on Natoma Bay from the Dictionary of Naval Fighting Ships. And doggone it, the ship had supported the Battle of Iwo Jima.
Yeah.
And I said, oh my God, what is going on here? And it was about that time that my wife at that point and her mother suggested that maybe this was reincarnation. And the first word in chapter 10 of my book is bullshit. No way. This is not happening here. This is not happening in my house. Whatever it is, I'm going to find out what it is. But it's not that. Period. Case closed. Don't mention it again. Well, I thought, how am I going to find out anything about this? And then my father had gone to a reunion that year and passed through our town to go to San Antonio from where he lived in Pennsylvania. And I thought loosely, well, maybe there's a reunion group like this about the ship. And I did some research and found a website on it's called the Escort Carriers Airmen and Seamen Organization. And there was a reunion group for Natoma Bay that had 4 names on it and numbers and addresses. And so I started to call these people. A couple of the numbers were, one number was disconnected. Another just rang. The other 2, I just kept calling them, trying to get a hold of somebody. So finally, after about 2 weeks, I got a hold of a guy named Leo Pyatt, and he asked me very quickly, why was I calling? Was I a veteran in Natoma Bay? And he lived in Columbus, Ohio. And I said, no, I'm not. He said, well, what are you interested in us for? I couldn't tell him why. Well, my kid is talking about your ship. He'd hung up,
Yeah.
So I gave him a BS story about why. And I said, well, tell me a little bit about Natoma Bay and what you did. He explained what he did. He explained that he had been there during the Battle of Iwo Jima. And my heart started to race because all of a sudden I realized that I was talking to somebody who was there at that time, at that specific place. And so after going through several things that we talked about, I finally screwed up the courage to say, because I'm still thinking about Jack Larson. I said, can you tell me anything about Jack Larson? He goes, oh yeah, I remember Jack. He flew off one day and I never saw him again. Now, Leo is on a short piece that was done by Fox TV in Cleveland. And on that piece, he goes, Bruce went silent. I had to call him back to the phone. Again, there was a guy named Jack Larson on the ship. And
so that was the first time you had that confirmed, that there was a Jack Larson on the ship. Yeah.
That's right. And so at that point, that's when a switch went on.
Mm.
I had to find out what this was. I didn't know how I was going to find out about it. I didn't know where I could find out about it. I didn't know when. I just knew that I was not going to stop looking.
Mm.
And I hadn't the vaguest idea how to go about it.
Yeah.
Okay. And Leo said, well, we're going to have a reunion in a couple of years. He said, maybe you come, I'll let you know when we're going to have it and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, that's real nice of you. And I didn't really think much about it at that point.
Yeah.
So I did start to do some research. Now, I was able to find stuff out about Natoma Bay. What else might I find? I found shortly after the first of the year, 2001, I found a listing of all the men that had been killed on escort carriers in World War II, or not escort carriers, aircraft carriers. Mm-hmm. That had been put together by somebody who had been a commander in the Navy, a guy named James Bryan Jr. And I could go through it. It had the designation of the ship. So I went through that list and found about 20 people whose names were listed as having been killed serving aboard Natoma Bay. And there wasn't anyone named Jack Larson on the list. There were a bunch of other things, a bunch of other names, but there wasn't anything that identified who they were or anything about what happened to them other than I went to the American Battle Monuments Commission and was able to find reports on these people, gave me rough information of when they went missing or when they were killed. And some of the dates were after the war was over. So what am I looking at? How does this work? But I did have that list. It went on for 80 pages. It took me 2 days to print it. Okay.
Yeah.
I kept getting kicked off the internet. So it was a place where, okay, who are all of these men and why is there no Jack Larson on the list? This doesn't make any sense. So finally, again, it was something where I just had to put it down because there wasn't anything else I could do with it or that I knew to do with it.
Yeah.
So then early that spring, James started to make drawings, and they were violent drawings. And this is one of the very first ones.
Yeah.
And he signed it James 3. Now, he didn't sign every one he did, but he did something like this almost every day for months.
Yeah.
Okay. I have some other samples here. But at one point I said, well, what are all of those dots? And he said, oh, that's flak. Again, now he wasn't 3 years old.
What's flak? Is that bullets?
What's flak?
Yeah, I don't even know.
That's what anti-aircraft, it's the bullets that anti-aircraft guns fire at aircraft to shoot them down.
Yeah, and he knew that word as well, flak.
Don't ask me why they call it flak, but that's what he said.
Wow. So
after a little bit of that, and where he signed a couple of other ones, here was another little one. He signed James 3. Okay. I screwed up the courage to ask him, well, why are you signing your name James 3? He said, I'm the third James. Huh? The third James? What do you mean? Oh, I'm the third James. And that was it. No explanation. I'm just the third James.
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't a James Jr. or anything. It was just James Madison Leininger. So I again hit a dead end, and then partway through the year, I got a letter from Leo indicating that there was going to be a reunion, and that it was going to be in September 2002. Well, this was sometime in April or May of 2001, so I had a year and a half I then did get a letter from a guy named Al Alcorn, who was the president of Natoma Bay Association in August of 2002. And he was kind of inviting me to the reunion. So I made arrangements to go to the reunion in 2002. I got to the reunion saying, okay, what is going on here? Okay. And still dealing with this issue at home of reincarnation, which I was just dismissing completely.
So was that a frequent topic? Your wife would mention it?
It came up. I can't say it was frequent because it was not a welcome subject.
Yeah. So I guess for you, it really hit a sensitive spot because you were, again, it went so against your worldview.
I was scared about this. I was nervous. I was troubled by it because as a Christian, I just didn't believe in reincarnation, which I had to battle my way through. It took me a couple of years to finally reconcile what was happening to that belief of reincarnation. Because I was trying to disprove it. I'm going to say this is just a bunch of coincidence. This couldn't happen. It was just some kind of strange coincidence. And it was more like I was dealing with voodoo than anything.
Yeah.
Stay away from it.
Your wife, she was believing that was the case at this point, or did she just think it was a possibility?
Her and her sisters were, you're an idiot.
They were all in at that point.
You've got some kind of past life memories and blah blah blah. Well, I just was fighting it.
Yeah, walls gone up, defenses up.
Yeah. So I went to the reunion in 2002. And when I got there, I had the opportunity to meet some of the two people I had contact with, Leo Pyatt and Al Alcorn. And then I was introduced to the historian of the organization, a guy named John DeWitt. And so he said, well, tell me a little bit about why you're here, because they were all very curious. No one had ever done this before.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm interested in your ship. I'm interested in what happened. I'm interested in learning more. I've got some information I'm trying to verify. And okay, well, tell me a little bit about what you're looking for. So I had that list of names, and he said, well, okay, these people were in this squadron. They were in this squadron. They were in this squadron. And I showed him the list, and he said, well, there's some names missing on there because they weren't assigned to the ship, and then one name was just left off for some error. So I finally screwed up my courage. I said, well, I've never been able to find out about a guy that was killed named Jack Larson, or a guy that's dead named Jack Larson. And he looked at me and says, Jack's dead? I said, well, I think so. He said, well, he's on our roster. I said, what? He said, he's on our roster. So we pulled out the roster. We made a copy of it. And that's Jack's name at the very bottom, living in Springdale, Arkansas. I was terrorized.
Yeah. What did you think at that moment?
Talking about a guy that's not dead.
Did that give you a little bit of relief? Maybe did you think, actually,
there's out of me.
You didn't give you hope to think, he's actually not as accurate as we thought, and he's
how? Here's a guy named Jack Larson. My son says Jack Larson flew off the ship. Okay, Leo Pyatt was at the reunion. He could tell me that's the guy who told me about Jack. Why is he alive? He's supposed to be dead. I went to visit him 2 weeks later and found out that at that point, there was a guy on the roster named James M. Huston Jr., who had been in the squadron at the same time, and he was the only man killed during the Battle of Iwo Jima. And he was a pilot, and he was killed during the Battle of Iwo Jima. So at that point, the lights kind of went on.
Yeah.
Signing these drawings, James 3, killed in the battle during the Battle of Iwo Jima. Is this the guy? Well, my ex-wife thought so right away. I didn't, because I didn't have anything that was definitive other than somebody telling me, show me a piece of paper. Well, at that point, I left the reunion. And 2 weeks later, I got a booklet from John DeWitt.
What were those 2 weeks like?
Huh?
What were the 2 weeks in between like after leaving the reunion before you received this booklet? What were you thinking? What were your, your emotions, your thought processes?
I was in turmoil. I was in absolute turmoil. I went to a website about Chichijima to learn a little bit about that, put a posting on there that I'm interested in knowing about somebody that was killed during the Battle of Iwo Jima there, because that's where this guy went missing, this guy named James M. Huston Jr. And so it was the first time that I connected James Huston Jr. to my son, because there was a citation in the report that talked about the mission that day, and that apparently his plane had been shot down and went into the water. I used the word apparently as, how can they say apparently? Well, I learned that much later, okay? But it was at this point that, wow, this has to be him, but how can it be him? And I was still not believing it, because my son said he flew a Corsair, and there were no Corsairs that ever flew off Natoma Bay. So, okay, how do we figure that out?
Yeah.
Okay. And why would he talk about a Corsair if there had been none? So I felt stymied, scared, and I was spending more and more time saying, well, all of these things. Well, because of the Corsair thing, I was hanging my hat on that.
Yeah.
This is my validity. Well, wait a minute, there's no Corsair. It can't be true. There's some intergalactic, strange, voodoo, whatever you want to call it. Is he possessed? Do we have to get an exorcism? I mean, those were the kind of things that raced through my head on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So at that point, I wasn't able to learn very much directly about anybody at the reunion, because unless you'd served with that person, there wasn't much that you knew. So we started to then look for some of the families. And at that point in February or so of 2003, we found the James M. Huston Jr. family. And a couple of weeks later, we got a picture. I don't have it in this book. There it is. We got a picture that was sent to us by Ann Barron, which was James Huston's sister. That's who we found by doing just genealogical research. And it was James M. Huston Jr. standing in front of a Corsair. And at that point, my brain went poof. I said, I have to believe that this is what happened. And then I had to get into the process of reconciling what is reincarnation, because it's just beyond, there's no other explanation that makes any sense at all. And then as I started to think more deeply about it, so wait a minute. Christianity tells me my soul lives forever. It goes on. It goes to heaven. Well, there's nothing that says that you couldn't be reincarnated. If you went to heaven, why would you come back? Okay, why would you reincarnate?
Yeah.
And it was as that was going on, one day James was in the sunroom of our home playing, and he started to talk about what he had experienced. He was actually stood up and saluted and said, "This is my neck, I'll do it." And then started to talk about some of that. So my ex-wife then started to ask him questions. Well, what is heaven like? And he said, it's right here. So, well, how do you come back? So, well, you can come back if you want to. So then and he started to then say things that a child that age, there's no way imaginable a child that age could say these things. And I'll give you a couple of those anecdotes as I was going through this.
Yeah, please.
She says, is God a man or a woman? Now he was 5 when he said this. He said, God is whoever you need God to be when you need God. That's 5. That's one of the most profound things I've ever heard anybody say. Yeah. I don't even think the Pope ever said that. Okay. All right. And then I had come home from work and we had gone out for a walk. And by this time, he had also started to receive G.I. Joe dolls. And the first one he got was one that had brown hair and called it Billy. Well, that was, he named his other stuffed toys after things. That Christmas, he then got another one, had blonde hair, and he named it Leon, which I thought was really strange. I don't know anybody named Leon. But at that point, I also realized that I looked at this list, and there was a guy named Leon on the roster. There was a guy named Billy on the roster. I thought, wow. Again, is it a coincidence? And at that point, I said, no, somehow or another, it's not. Well, after I'd come home from the reunion, we had hit by a hurricane, and I was cleaning up in the yard and we were raking up leaves, and James comes over I said, come on over here and let me love on you, because it was hopping in the leaves and scattering them as quickly as I could rake them up. Yeah. And I said, come on over here and let me love on you. So he sat on a staircase in a building in my backyard, and he sat on my knee. I said, I love you, son. I said, you're such a special young boy. And he said, Daddy, he said, I knew you'd be a good daddy when I picked you. Huh? Yeah. You picked me? You picked? Well, yeah, when I picked you and Mommy, I knew you'd be good parents. And I just got nervous again. Well, where were we when you picked us? He says, oh, we were in Hawaii. I said, no, we went to Hawaii after we sold the company. He says, no, it was just you and Mommy. I said, well, where were we? He says, you were at a big pink hotel. And I went blank. Because for our 5th anniversary in 1997, we had gone to a big pink hotel in Honolulu and stayed there. I said, well, what were we doing? He said, you were on the beach at night having dinner. To celebrate our anniversary, I had a nice dinner on the beach, served privately. Yeah. Now, there's no way, that was nothing we ever spoke about. That had happened 20 years earlier or 15 years earlier, you know, and I just mystified. So
I'm getting a few hairs stand up now, Bruce.
Yeah. So now I'm going, okay, how do I reconcile this with my belief system? Or what do I have to do to modify or adjust my beliefs? I said, well, if you come back, you come back. Whatever your decision is, and is there a plan to do this? I don't. At that point, I didn't know. I just said, well, if we exercise, then why do we lose free will when we get to heaven if I want to come back? Free will is a gift that we receive. So as time went on, there were just more and more things that occurred, including getting these G.I. Joe dolls. That was startling. About a year later, he got a 3rd doll. It had red hair, and he named it Walter. And at that point, again, I was just floored. Because those 3 names, Billy, Leon, and Walter, meant something because they were on that roster that I had found. So I screwed up my courage that evening. As he went to bed, I said, why did you name your dolls Billy, Walter, and Leon? He said, because they greeted me when I got to heaven. Each of those men had been pilots in the same squadron that James M. Houston Jr. was in, and all 3 had been killed before he had been killed on March 3rd, 1945. That was kind of the final piece of tape that sealed this thing up. another thing that happened, and this is really where we can kind of digress to any point that you'd like to get to, was I then also learned about was contacted by a guy from a squadron called DC-83 that flew off of USS Sergeant Bay CVE 83. He read my post on this website that I had put on shortly after going to the 2002 reunion. And he said, I flew on a mission that day and I saw a plane get shot down. I spoke with him. He sent me a little report, and his description of what happened to the plane he saw get shot down matched exactly what my son said. This plane had got shot in the engine, crashed into the water. That's exactly what he described. I went to a reunion and met 4 men at that reunion that described exactly what my son described happening to his plane. Now, I knew who they were because I had the aircraft action reports. I had received 9 rolls of microfilm from John DeWitt and copied 5,000 pages on 9 rolls of microfilm, 1 page at a time. It took me 2 weeks at a library here in Lafayette. So I have all the military records of the ship, or most of them, in binders, and can verify that those things verify exactly what my son said. So I had to give up the ghost and not believe in it. And then getting behind, well, how could it happen, or why does it happen, or what does this mean to us? And it's changed my life immensely. I have relationships, I have experiences that I would have never, ever dreamt of, because I just didn't believe in any of those spiritual approaches toward life.
Yeah.
It changed my life completely for the better. Life is a mystery. We got to step into it every day. And sometimes we step into stuff that scares the daylights out of us.
That you're not ready for and didn't ask for, and everything like that.
Yeah. So I don't know how or what else you want to,
there's yeah, exactly. There's so many different directions I could go. I mean, are you still a Christian? How did it affect your faith in the end? How did you said you had to try and reconcile that and try and either, change your views or figure out how you can incorporate it into your views. So how was that process? And what are your thoughts now?
My thought process. Well, there was nothing inconsistent with it, with my Christian belief. Our souls go on forever. We don't know what happens on the other side of the veil.
Yeah.
In fact, there were several military veterans that came to me because once they understood what I was doing, because all the men on the Natoma Bay Association eventually understood why I had done this. But in at least 2 or 3 instances, men came to me and said, I'm no longer afraid of death. I'm no longer afraid of what's on the other side of the veil.
Has it made you less afraid of death?
Yeah, because we're on an eternal journey. I signed my book, Nurture Your Soul. You're on an eternal journey with God's blessing. This is it's like a long train ride that never ends. And the body I'm in today is this segment of the long train ride. The things that I experienced, the things that I'm able to see and touch, the people that I get to know are all part of a continuum that enriches my soul.
Yeah.
That's the way I view reincarnation. It's that opportunity to grow.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating in the sense that, it's easy to speculate. There's lots of different speculations that we could make. For example, it could be that everybody gets reincarnated, but 99.99% of people don't remember, their former incarnations. But then, so in that way of looking at it, people like James there was something maybe went wrong, in the process of wiping the memories or what have you. But then on the other side, I mean, it's just such an unbelievable thing, isn't it? Tell me about when you met the sister. Was it Anne?
Okay, well, in 2004, we went to a reunion, and there's a point I'll come back to about what you were just saying, but we went to the 2004 reunion, and we started to attract attention from television. So we had to let people know that, hey, we're going to be on TV about this. So to go back to Ann Barron, a little bit of a story is we called her up, said, look, we're going to be interviewed for ABC Primetime by Chris Cuomo. And we just want you to know that this is what the story is about. And we didn't know whether she would fall over dead or believe it. Well, she embraced the fact that she believed that this was true, because she then gave us an anecdote. And I have a letter from her saying that she was cleaning her home because James was supposed to come home on a leave after the squadron was disbanded, and they learned that he had been killed, or she learned that he had been killed a couple of days later, but she felt his presence in the room while she was cleaning her home in California. There was also, he had a good friend named Jim Eastman, and Jim Eastman's mother had the same experience, that James Houston came to her in a dream saying, I'm in heaven, I'm okay. And I have letters to that effect from Anne saying that, wow, which was quite relieving, because we didn't know how people would react to this. We didn't know what they would think.
Yeah.
We didn't just do anything. So anyway, we were taping for ABC Primetime. And just at that point that we were kind of finishing up the taping, a package showed up from Anne, and it had some artifacts in it that I don't have because my son has them now. But it was a bust of George Washington. It was a little plastic Corsair model that hung in the ready room of the ship. These were part of Jim's final effects that had been sent home by Bob Greenwald. Okay, when I'll get to that bit of story. She sent them to us, and she says, I believe in your story. I believe in what's happened. And I've sent these to you because they're James's, they belong to James.
Wow.
And she called them Jimmy, and he called her Annie. Okay. So we wound up meeting her at the 2004 reunion. It was an opportunity to do a lot of fascinating things. And James was so gentle with her, was so tender with her. And they just, it was like they knew each other. And she was 88 years old, and he was 6.
Yeah.
And they were just
crazy,
getting on with each other.
Was in that moment, just to ask a quick question about that, was when you looked at him talking to her, was it still the same James that you knew, or was there kind of like, did he change a bit? Did his demeanor change? Was there was it a morphing of, two people? You know what I'm getting at here? Like, did you notice anything to that effect?
I would say that it was a feeling of presence. It was more than James. He felt larger, mm-hmm, in a sense, that there was an energy around him the whole time. One of my favorite things was, this is him at the reunion with a picture of Jack Larson.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Okay. And at one point, my ex-wife was taking him up to his room to do his homework, which as a 6 or 7-year-old, do you have homework? Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And a man was coming down out of the elevator, and we had been on TV by this point, so there were things that people knew, including the fact that I'd gotten a call from a guy named Bob Greenwald, who flew in the same squadron of Corsairs that Huston flew in, who also transferred to Natoma Bay on the same day that Huston did, which was actually my birthday in 1944. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, his name is Bob Greenwalt, real guy. This is Bob right here. This is a picture of those three men had flown together in the same squadron. This is Jack Larson, Bob Greenwalt, and a guy named Dean Tate.
Wow.
All World War II fighter pilots.
Yeah.
First time they'd seen each other since March 11th, 1945.
Really?
This was in 2004.
Yeah.
So anyway, Bob was coming out of the elevator and James was going in, and Bob looked down and he says, "Bet you don't know who I am." And James looked up at him and he says, "You're Bob Greenwalt." Bob came to me later. He says, "How the hell did he know that?" I said, "I have no idea, because I didn't even know what he looked like. I'd only talked to him on the phone." Yeah. So later I asked James, I said, "Can you tell me why you knew that was Mr. Greenwalt?" He said, "I remembered his voice." What?
Yeah.
And then the other thing, he had this, we were in the pool taking a little bit of a break, and he had this quizzical, kind of sad, he was looking melancholy. I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm okay." I said, "Well, what's bothering you?" He said, "How come everybody's so old?" Here he was hanging around with a bunch of people that are 80 years older than him, 75 years older.
Yeah. And
getting along with them famously. You know, he was having breakfast with Jack and Bob.
Yeah, Jack was his like best friend on the Natoma, right?
Bob Greenwalt.
Oh, was it? I thought Jack was best friends with James. Is that not?
They knew each other, but
they knew each other. But
Greenwalt had been a member of VF 301, and VF 301 was actually the squadron that test flew a redesigned Corsair for qualification on naval ships.
Yeah.
In World War II. And I have that record. I have the pilot logbooks of 2 or 3 of the pilots that did that work, including Bob Greenwalt. So over time, I have all of these pieces of information that just continue to reinforce the things that my son said. I never found anything that was at odds with any factual information I was able to determine. The who's, the what's, the whens, who were they, when were they killed, even the specific thing of Billy Walter and Leon. They greeted me when I went to heaven, and they were the first names of the 3 pilots, and their hair color on their G.I. Joe dolls matched their hair color.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had color photos of all 3 men.
What did Bob Greenwald and Jack Larson say to you about, like, what did they share their thoughts on whether they believed your son, whether they were on the fence, whether there was anything compelling that he had said to them? Did they share much with you?
Some of them, let's see, when Leo Pyatt found out about it, he said, "Well, that's amazing, because we're talking about reincarnation at my church." Huh? Okay. And I believe Leo was Catholic, but I'm not sure. Everyone else embraced it because first of all, the evidence was overwhelming. Did they understand it? No. Do I understand it? No. Does anybody really understand it? No. There's no way to know exactly what it is, because no one understands completely what happens on the other side of the veil. But you have to go in faith. That was the other thing that I had to reconcile, that your faith is what carries you. Your faith and hope that if this gift of eternity belongs to each of us, then what do we do to value and honor that? I'm going to call it a gift. To know that we're here to grow. We're here to grow.
Did you ever
in some way?
Did you ever find out, either through your research or via Anne, his sister, whether James Huston was religious, or whether, you know, anything like what he believed, what his faith was in that sense?
They had gone to church, but I would say that, you know, there were a typical Christian family. Um, there were things about the personal life that he gave us details about. One of the most fascinating things that occurred, if I have it here with me, was I had received a package. It was just another, I'm going to say, component of information that just went way beyond any kind of coincidence. Here, this is the picture of James with Anne during the reunion.
Yeah.
I mean,
two very happy people.
Just looking at ease. There's a picture of James having breakfast with Bob Greenwalt and Jack Larson.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, what?
Yeah, I know.
Well, how do you figure? How do you explain this?
You must have had lots of people try and explain it to you in different ways over the years. You must have had lots of people that haven't been on the same journey as you, that had the same thoughts as you had at the beginning. So hardcore skeptics. You must have had a lot of that.
Well, I like the skeptics. Why? Look at, if you're skeptical, then you're going to ask questions. I don't believe that blind faith is healthy. Well, let's just run off the roof together because we think we're going to be okay. And when everybody's thinking alike, nobody's thinking. So the skeptic, you know, that's how we advance our society, through the skeptics. Is no, I can change it. I can do something to change it. You know, if that's not true, what's this?
Yeah.
You know, yes, we can change the way something works. So I don't have any issue with a skeptic. I actually like those people.
Yeah.
Because I was, you know,
exactly. But if you had skeptics come to you and say like, "Oh, you must have fed him this information," or "Oh, he must have," you know.
Yeah. There's been a few of those, and all I got to do is what I did with Jim Tucker, Dr. Jim Tucker, and there was a guy also. He was the editor of the religious page of, I think, the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper. I think that's what it was called. And they came to my house for 3 days, or 2 or 3 days. I gave them all the information. I said, here are all the facts. I put it on CDs. I gave them copies of it. I said, if there's some other explanation, please tell me what it is. Because it's not coincidence. There's too many, you know, when lightning hits the same place 30 times, it's not a coincidence. And that's the way I realized this, and actually I'm quite humbled by the whole thing, that I have somebody on the other side of the ocean want to talk to me about this. Well, it's because it's important. That's why, because it piques our spiritual searching. And if anything, reincarnation is about spiritual searching. I want to grow my spirit.
Before I saw the Leslie Kean series, I watched the series before reading the book, Surviving Death. Right. Before I saw that, or even as I was watching that, I kind of, you know, you turn to the person you're watching with and say, what do you think about, you know, and I was totally not into this kind of thing. I wouldn't really given it much time of day. If somebody said to me, what do you think about reincarnation? I'd say, I think it's probably bollocks, you know, and that's such a little time ago. And yet I've kind of jumped headfirst into all this, you know, since watching that series. I've read that book. I've looked into it all a lot more. And like you said about lightning striking the same place 30 times or 100 times or 1,000 times, like there's clearly something, whether or not we know exactly what it is, there's clearly something that we don't understand going on here that doesn't add up to, you know, it's not included in the current materialistic worldview. Held by like mainstream science, I suppose. It's
well because it's it's in quote unscientific. How do you prove something that doesn't agree with or is not conducive to the scientific method? Well, that's where you go on faith.
Yeah. But then Jim Tucker, there's people like Jim Tucker, you mentioned him, Dr. Jim Tucker, trying to kind of at least show that this is happening in a more scientific sense with quantitative data. When did he first get involved? When did you first have any interaction with Dr. Jim Tucker? Because he's like the leading probably researcher in the world on this phenomena, or at least one of them. Well,
he contacted me first, probably not long after we were on ABC primetime in 2003 or four.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when it was. So we've been on so many programs, I can't keep count of it.
Yeah, I bet.
He contacted me, and at that point, we were also concerned about protecting James. I didn't want this to turn into some kind of sideshow for my son.
Yeah.
So we were really hesitant to open up to this thing. So very reluctant to even do the ABC primetime thing.
Yeah.
But we did it because at that point we felt like we had facts. I had something that I could nail down and say, this is it. I virtually have 2 or 3 ways to verify everything James ever said related to this.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how do I verify that he remembered Bob Greenwald's voice? It's easy, because he looked up and said, "Oh, you're Bob." That's how.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So the issue is, once you're confronted with so much fact, and Bob or Jim Tucker says that our case, as he describes it, is the best documented case of reincarnation he's ever seen. Well, we were fortunate, and I want to explain something about that. But first, I want to show you this as well. This is just another one of those little anecdotal things about the world that James was in.
Mm-hmm.
This was a blown up copy of a painting that James M. Huston's mother did of James Huston when he was 2. So I had come home from work in January of 2006 and found a small package from Federal Express or UPS sitting at the door. I opened it up. And when I opened it up, there was that, along with a little note. Now, James and Annie spoke with each other on their birthdays. They spoke with each other at Christmas.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Anne said that the only person that ever called him Annie was Jim, her brother. He called her Annie. So anyway, I'll read you this little note. This was a note that came with the picture. It said, "Dear James, I do hope that this is the picture you asked me for. It is the only one of me done by my mother. I am sorry to be so long in sending it to you, but the past few weeks have been very hectic. I hope you like it. With my love, Annie."
Wow. Yeah.
There was one picture of this, and it was in her attic in Los Gatos, California. And the way he asked about it was where's the picture of Mom that did a view? She did a view that was like mine.
Yeah. It kind of jogged my memory from reading your chapter in Leslie's book, where I think she sent the picture first of James, and then James said, "Great, but where's the one of you?"
That's right. That's right,
wasn't it? Yeah.
That's exactly correct. So how do you deal with all that?
Yeah.
And there's a comfort level, in a sense, to this. Reincarnation isn't a do-over. Reincarnation's about growth. And it's probably more important to talk about that opportunity. And so the issue of being afraid of it or nervous about it or wanting to learn more about it or who am I about and what am I about and why am I here are important issues. They're startling issues. And we spend let's just say, too little time on that, understanding what that gift is. Just the whole idea of the amount of information that he gave us that I was able to verify. It's just way beyond coincidence. I'm actually humbled by the whole process, because I would have, if I was going to pick somebody to do this, it wouldn't have been me. Because I was not open-minded about it. It was actually, I had to pry the lid off of my head to dump information in there that was even remotely acceptable. I just refused to accept that this was possible until I was confronted with so much information. It's like questioning whether the sun is going to come up in the east. Well, just let's watch where the sun comes up for 1,000 days. If you want to prove something different, go ahead and try it again. You know, and that might not be the best example, but it's a good one.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody that heard all the information, all the whole story, and still says, "Oh well, it's probably just a big bizarre coincidence"? Like, what would you say to that person?
Let's go beyond coincidence. Let's talk about, if it is coincidence, why would it be coincidence? Let's go into the who, the what, the why, the where, the when, and how, which is what good journalism is all about. Okay? So for something to occur like this, that's one. Two, attract the information, the interest it has. It's just not some loose cannonball rolling around on the deck of life. Okay, it has a purpose, and that's quite humbling to me. That somehow or another I fit into some scheme or plan because of something about who I am. It might be just part of my plan for my own soul. You know.
Yeah.
We're all afraid of something. So how do you get, if you have a fear or a phobia, how do you get over it?
Yeah.
Confront it.
Absolutely.
Confront it and deal with it, and realize it won't kill you.
Yeah.
And that might be a little too simplistic, but when we published our book, we had a website and we had a blog going for a while, which I now think I probably should not have shut down. I'm actually thinking of reactivating it. And when you get a letter from somebody in Brazil who says, "I'm an atheist, and now I have to rethink my beliefs."
Yeah.
If that was the only person on this planet that this story ever touched, then as far as I'm concerned, if I got picked to do this, thank you. I'm still amazed and humbled by it. I'm still startled by it. In many ways overwhelmed by it.
Because it's to be expected. Yeah, it's just when you stop and think about it, it's massive, isn't it? It's unbelievable. Bruce, what to your colleagues and friends and acquaintances, what's kind of been the general reaction from them, where either when they first hear about it or first realize that oh, I've heard of that, oh, that was you, or when you bring it up to them? Are people like, what's the more common? Is it fascination? Is it disbelief? Is positive, negative? What's the?
I'd say the overwhelming reception of it is a positive one. It's an inspiring story in a sense. There's many places of inspiration. Just the opportunity to keep the names of these men alive who served on this ship. Their names are out there in the universe forever.
Yeah.
So I'd say one of acceptance. There are some skepticism. There have been some people who are afraid of it. and dismiss it. And from my point of view, wherever you are in your path, just stay on the path. You know, and if you don't want to, if you want to dismiss it, well, it's your choice to dismiss it.
Yeah.
Your choice to believe it or not believe it.
Yeah.
Like again, I welcome the skeptic. I welcome any questions about it. I'll answer them to the best of my ability to answer it.
Yeah.
But at the end of and I didn't, and we had a major battle over the title of the book because I didn't want to use the word reincarnation.
Right.
Because I just believe it conjures up a fixed image in somebody's head.
Yeah.
And this goes way beyond that. This was a dynamic, moving consciousness that you just can't call it this.
Yeah.
This is part of watching a soul on a journey is the way I view it. Okay. My son is living his dreams. My son has picked up the same rope. He's a warrior. He's in the military. Okay. And it fits him like a glove. There's an energy about his soul that says, I'm here to protect you.
Yeah.
And that's what he does. He's in the military.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Okay.
Amazing.
So for anybody that listens to this or anybody that views it, figure out where you are in your journey and embrace it. If you're uncertain, then look into it. One of the things that I want to digress about for a second is the window of the possibilities of putting this together go along with the fact that it can't be coincidental. And I'm going to explain that very briefly. The first time I met these men in 2002, that was 57 years after they had served in the military. So they were all in their late 70s when I met them for the first time. So far as I know, every one of them are all on another segment of their journey because they're all gone. This segment. So that window from 2002 to 2003, 4, 5, 6 was a window of time, a brief window of time in eternity's journey. The next piece is the internet. Okay, it took me 2 days to print the documents from the Escort Carriers Association of the men that were killed in World War II serving on aircraft carriers. There's 84 pages. Took 2 days because I kept losing contact. I was about ready to throw the computer out of the damn window because you keep losing contact. You don't have what you have now. It was nowhere near as easy. You know, you can dial in anything and find something about it out there. That just wasn't the way it worked in 2002. Just not. So that window of time where the internet was robust enough to go find stuff. You know, anybody listening to this, hey, how many people know about the American Battle Monuments Commission? There's a stumper for you. That'd be a good trivial question in a bar. Okay. And that was one of the first avenues of approach. It was up and running. It was able to give me a small little part of the picture. Because I was able to get a name associated with a time frame and something about who they were.
Yeah.
The ability to contact these people. You know, being able to gather up pilot logbooks from 15 or 20 pilots or air crewmen that can attest to what was going on. So I can prove that Jack Larson was on the mission that day because I have his flight logbook that tells me he flew on a mission that day, which mystified me.
Yeah.
Let's see, when I first went to see Jack, I was scared. What? It was one of these things. What does he know? What does he feel? What is he thinking about me coming to see him?
Yeah.
And then what does he do? He gives James the helmet that he flew the day that James Houston was killed on that mission. My son James has that pilot's helmet. Well, no, I have it. Okay, it should be in a museum.
Yeah.
Okay. And Jack Larson describing the mission that day. He said there was so much flak in the air, I thought I could have walked to the ground on it. Someone to get the hell out of there. And no one knew Houston was missing until they got back to the ship and he didn't come back. Nobody saw what happened. That whole word apparently was because the report that they got about seeing the plane get shot down came from third parties that were not members of the squadron. I'm not going to make a long story out of it, but just so many different ways this information came together in something that is waterproof.
And it shows how easy it would have been for this to all never really be able to be proven or be shown by you. Like if it had happened a couple of years earlier, the internet wouldn't have been capable of doing what you did. If it had happened a couple of years later, a lot of the gentlemen that gave you the information would have passed away already. There's so much with it that's fascinating. Do you mind if, just to finish off, because I'm conscious of the time, if I just ask you a few questions?
Yes.
Obviously bear in mind that we haven't got too much time left, and so just try and kind of keep your answers fairly brief, but I don't want to rush you, but just be conscious of that.
I'll get it.
Yeah. So firstly, your relationship with James, like how has that changed? How did it change after you accepted that he was, in one way or another, however it happened, he was once somebody else, or a part of him was once somebody else? Did that affect your relationship, and if so, how?
Not really. I just tried to be as good a father as I could be.
Yeah.
He's an Eagle Scout. I got involved in Scouts. I was never a Scout. I tried to be an example for him. I tried to give him as much as I could for him to move on with his life and grow, and he has. He's, support him through the decision-making process to be doing what he's doing.
Yeah. And how hard was it for James, do you think, to like kind of to live with this, to process?
Well, he
this
got
stuff?
castigated. He received so much attention about this that his little buddies at school would give him a hard time about it. There were points in time where he was actually bullied about it because of I'm going to just say notoriety and attention he had received. I mean, how many 5 and 6 year old kids get to be on TV all the time?
Yeah, our kids will bully you for anything anyway, won't they? So with this, you can imagine. Yeah. What about James's memories? How long did they last? Have they faded now? How long did they take to fade?
Yeah, there's a natural process where that stuff kind of disappears, unless a person goes through maybe regression or some kind of hypnosis process and regression. One of the people that we were on, I think of the Oprah Winfrey Network, she had a PhD in psychology. She was also an opera singer for the San Francisco Opera. What an unusual set of talent. And she did her PhD thesis on dreaming. And she said that the manifestation of these memories are much like dreams, and that as the brain develops, those early memories kind of disappear. So by the time a person's 4 or 5 years old, they start developing long-term memory, and anything before that gets lost. So if you think about your own life, think about what you remember when you were 4. You were experiencing a lot of things. Matter of fact, you're growing faster at that rate than you ever did. You're experiencing so many things, but you don't remember it.
Yeah.
So it's a natural progression of development of the brain that causes that stuff to go away.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Does he retain anything now? Any little snippets or any like
The only thing that he
there?
would occasionally do would be if there was a lot of attention around the story, he would sometimes remember what happened to him.
Mm.
He'd have that snapshot of it, which would bother him, you know.
Of how James
Huston
died.
Like a post-traumatic stress disorder kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow, that must be just incredible to deal with. So how many people, I'm assuming you've had lots of people come to you since your story kind of became known, that have had similar experiences. Just have you had lots of people come to you and say, oh, I've had the same experience with my son or daughter?
Yeah, I'd say a fair number. I remember getting a call from a guy named actually Landry, who lived up in the Boston area after, I think, one of the very first episodes, and he had recurring dreams about flying off an aircraft carrier. And he knew it was a World War II aircraft carrier because of research that he had done. And he said, yeah, I know I'm having past life memories. I was an executive for a helicopter company, and there was a pilot from Venezuela who had his own memories. And he had determined that he had been a Luftwaffe pilot in World War II and had been shot down and killed. And he had the proof.
Wow.
For him, he had proof. That's who I was dreaming about, because he was able to specifically correlate what he remembered versus what he was able to find.
Yeah.
So I'd say there have been a fair number of people that have come about it.
Yeah.
Talked about it.
And I believe Jim Tucker has and his colleagues over there at Virginia, I think they have like 2,500 or more cases on their books, which is just unbelievable. And some of them, similarly, tracked in a similar sense or even in more detail. So they're just as compelling cases. It really is fascinating.
And Leslie's done some good work on it.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Which I'll put the links to all those, your books, Leslie's book, in the description of this episode. Mm-hmm. Have you experienced any other bizarre phenomena that would kind of confound you since this whole episode? Have you ever had, like an out-of-body experience, near-death experience, just anything that defied your... No? So this is your one... Well, you've already had enough for a lifetime, I suppose, of bizarre experience.
Let me deal with this one.
No, that's...
There might have been a couple of things where I don't know whether I was dreaming and having an out-of-body experience or it was a real one. My father went through that very late, and it was actually based on that he came to believe that what happened. My father didn't want to believe any of this for a long, long time until he had that experience.
Wow.
And realized that what James talked about was real.
So he had something in a dream, something.
Yeah, he had surgery and had out of body experience during surgery.
Yeah,
where he could see what they were doing to him from the ceiling.
Yeah, I've heard about very similar accounts. It's unbelievable. One thing with all the research I've done into your story and James's story and all the the TV shows and everything, I've never seen anybody mention the fact that they were both James. And it doesn't really happen in a lot of other cases. So do you think, your personal opinion, was that just the name thing only now, the James and James? Is that coincidence? Is that a little part of this coincidence, or is there something more?
Well, the fact that we picked the name James Madison. Yeah. That's his first and middle name. He's actually named after his great grandfather named James Madison Scoggin, which was on my ex-wife's family side.
Wow. Okay.
And we had a chance to learn a lot about him. And so we feel that it was a good way to carry on that name when we gave him the name James M. Huston.
Yeah.
James M. Leininger.
Yeah. Maybe written in the stars.
Yeah, Huston's middle name was McCready. That was a family name.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't Madison. So, but the fact that he nailed the James 3 thing, that's kind of scary.
But it wasn't like you held this new baby and you looked at him and thought, oh no, we have to change his name to James.
No. It was kind of
oh, that's something. Yeah. Look, Bruce, this has been amazing. I appreciate your time so much. To wrap it up, have you got any last like kind of words or any message you'd like to pass to anybody watching or listening or anything at all?
If you have questions, seek to get answers to your questions. Whether you believe what we're talking about or not, if whatever those questions are about who you are and what you are, just remember that you are a gift, that you are created, and that you're on an eternal journey. Awesome. And cherish that gift, because it's truly a gift. We each experience a piece of the infinite journey of this universe when we're here.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bruce. And anybody that wants to find out more about your story, about James's story, the links to your book, like I say, to Leslie Kean's book, I'm going to put all that in the description. So before dismissing anything, you have to read that, or just at least find out more information.
And if like you say, Bruce, and then I also sent you a link on The Great Beyond Revealed, which you can pick up on Amazon Prime or Vimeo, which is a fairly succinct repeat of what this is. I mean, people could watch your blog over and over again, and whatever you're doing with it, go do it. If there's anything else I can do to help you with this, let me know. Awesome. Because I'm here to stand behind what I have to say. I feel humbled by it. I feel it's a true gift to me. It enriches my life. Some days it scares the daylights out of me, because I feel like I have such a responsibility to be true.
Yeah. You have to pinch yourself. Thank you so much, Bruce. I really appreciate your time and going into all your memories. I wish you all the best.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Bruce Leininger. I hope you enjoyed the journey and had your mind open to what might be possible. Please check out the links in the description for more information, Bruce's book, and for other episodes we recommend.